Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Big Bill coming to you live from Model Railroading Live, the #1 model railroading show in the entire world. Today is October 3rd, Saturday, and we're going to be continuing our small layout, big opportunities. Last time we were on part 2. This will be part 2.1 because we weren't able to finish the last time we were here. The presenters tonight are Tommy K and John 2618. And we have two special guests with us tonight that Tom invited, Alex Bogatsky and our good friend Scott Thornton. So we will be, Tom and John will be talking to them, and I'll be taking your questions, relaying it to them. One thing I'd like to stress, well, not stress, but just lay out, these guys have really done a lot of hard work into Tom and John and the rest of it to get this really together. And so if we could keep the questions, questions, and because the last couple of times we did a lot of reacting. I mean, no problem saying hello to each other. We don't got a problem with that. But let's try to keep it on topic because these men have, these guys put a lot of work into this, and it would, let's ask them some relative questions to what's going on. I think it's a very interesting topic. It's small layouts with big opportunities. Without any further ado, I will turn it over to Tommy K.
Well, good evening. Thanks, Bill. And welcome to everybody out there. Today, we're going to talk about industries, selecting industries for your layout, construction methods. Again, how do you build the benchwork? There's a couple of different unique options here. Scott has some metal framework. Alex has the IKEA shelving system, which is very interesting. Lots of modelers are going that route. We're also going to talk a little bit maybe about hand laying track. Scott has got some excellent examples of some hand laid track that he's done. And we're also going to try to tie in a little bit about electrical, DC, DCC, some of the things that we do to try to make our layouts operate a little bit better. And then we'll highlight some track plans. We're also going to give Alex a chance to go over his track plan. He's got a very nice room L-shaped layout. Gives him lots of operation, and the good part is he can move it if he needs to. So some of the first things that you think about once you design the layout, and last time we talked a little bit about design, but right after you design it, you need to have some industries or places for your railroad to go to. So if you're modeling the prototype, you would think it'd be pretty easy. You just model what's there. But that's not always the case. As an example, on my layout, there's a large grain facility that takes cuts of 25 cars, of hopper cars. And that was just too big. It would have just overwhelmed my layout. So as much as I wanted to model it, I decided just to eliminate it. That's part of the editing that we talked about last time. And some of the other things that you want to look at are maybe focusing on a few larger industries rather than several smaller ones, especially in the modern era. Most industries that are served today usually are going to take 2, 3, 4 or more cars. The single industry is kind of something that was done in the old days, but not so much anymore. Again, it's just not feasible for railroads to serve a customer with maybe just one car. So again, it looks more realistic. One of the things that I did on my layout is I have a spot specific industry. And a spot specific industry, in my case, is Dow Chemical. Dow takes tank cars, and on the prototype, there's 5 car spots. On my layout, I could only get in 3 car spots, which is okay. But on the prototype, spot number 3 is an acid unloading spot. So spots 1, 2, 4, and 5 take the same type of car, but spot 3 takes a different car. So that makes more work for the crews when they're switching because they have to get that car in the right spot. And as an example, if you needed to pull car number 5, then you have to respot those other cars, and it just makes more work. So what you're doing is you're actually making more work for the local crew, and it's making that industry operate it's going to take you a little bit longer to operate on that industry, which gives you, as I say, more bang for your buck. If you just had 3 cars and they were all the same and you just spotted them at the industry, that would be over pretty quickly. But here you have to pull and respot. There's lots of examples of spot specific industries. They could be food warehouses or distribution warehouses. And you just need to do a little bit of digging on the prototype. You'll notice here that Dow Chemical is a pretty substantial structure. On my layout, it's somewhere between 2.5 to 3 feet long. And again, it looks substantial enough to actually be rail served. One of the things that kind of gives the model railroad away is you have this little tiny structure, and then you want to spot 2 or 3 cars there. And the building's not big enough to even hold the contents of 1 boxcar. So that's something to think about when you're designing your layout. Some of the other things that you want to consider are car sizes for the industries. If you have short, like in this case, a short tank car, you're going to get more car spots for the industry that you have. Some of the industries that work really well for a model railroad are the short cement hopper cars. I've got an industry here that takes the 2-bay hopper cars, and also some of the smaller gravel cars, in this case, Ortner hopper cars. Alex, when you were building your layout, did you consider car sizes for your industries?
I did, and so I'm modeling a very specific prototype slice. I'm modeling Frederick, Oklahoma, roughly era 1995 to 2005. So I had a great, prototype. I can look at historic photos, look at railfan photos, look at Google Earth. Google Earth has this neat option where you can actually go back through different satellite photo dates and so see what kind of cars are spotted there. But it's actually not a super conducive place to model in many ways, because 2 of the major industries are grain elevators. And like you talked about, these things often take 20 cars at a time. I was able to get it down to where each grain elevator can take enough cars that if you look at it at the right angle, it looks okay. But one of the reasons why I like Frederick, Oklahoma is it did have a couple industries beyond just grain and fertilizer. It had, at the time I'm modeling, still had 2 carload industries that shipped cotton, compressed cotton bales and boxcars, which is really easy to model because it's just a plain warehouse with a loading dock, and you could spot specific boxcars. And it also has an interchange. This is where Farm Rail meets the Wichita, Tillman, and Jackson, which is former MKT Northwest District. And so it's not a busy interchange, but you can plausibly put cars there and have different kind of car loads besides just the box cars and covered hoppers that are common in the town. So I can do some more like oil field related traffic, tank cars, pressurized differential covered hoppers, some gravel, things like that. And then I also have a kind of call it an industry in the aisle. And this is kind of pushing the era of my layout. I believe the spur was built in 2006. I'm trying to keep it in the 95 to 2005 era, but I kind of bent it. And so I also have this industry in the aisle, and it's a liquid fertilizer unloading spur. And so in reality, there's these really big tanks, these big fertilizer tanks that sit there. I just have kind of imaginary that the tanks are out here in the aisle, and there's just hoses going from the tank cars out to the aisle to simulate that there's this fertilizer unloading. So that's what the kind of cars I ship, and it's very much, I model, it's very compressed, but every industry that is actually in Frederick, Oklahoma is represented on my layout.
Okay. Yeah. Looks like Alex is locking up here a little bit on us, but I've got some photos of his layout. We'll show that a little bit later where we can talk about those industries that he just mentioned. John, what was your consideration when you were looking at freelancing and you were trying to select some industries? Did you select like the corn syrup industry for a specific reason?
Yeah, I actually, I thought, the corn syrup cars are smaller. So I figured I could get more of them on an industry. So that was definitely big on my consideration list of, when I was picking an industry, you don't really I didn't want to pick an industry where I had, such large cars where I could only have a couple cars being spotted even on the whole layout. So, and I also like the look of the corn syrup cars. So that's the reason why I chose them. It gives me more, and plus with the different corn syrup, there's different grades of corn syrup. So it does give you some opportunity of variety in the switching.
Right. Lance Menheim mentioned
Yep.
that, and he models a corn syrup facility, which I had no idea. And there's different grades, and each spot has to have the 100, the 70, the 60, whatever it is. So each spot, that's a very simple spot specific industry. You wouldn't consider the extra work that's required to be able to, service that industry. Again, if you have to pull a certain car and then respot the other cars, that just adds time.
Yep.
And gives you a little bit more operations on your layout. Scott, how about you with selecting industries for your layout? Did you consider different things? Again, you're leaning more towards the prototype, so you would think that would be easier, but probably not so much, right?
Well, actually, it was very easy because I was looking for a branch line to model off the Iowa Interstate, and there was only 3 options. And the one option that fit my interests perfectly was the Milan branch in the Quad Cities, because not only was it a nice length of a branch line, it's only 12 miles long, but it had a huge variety of industries. It has everything from aggregate dealer to chemical dealer to steel. It was the perfect food. It had this huge variety of industries, so it was an easy choice for me to pick that particular branch to model, prototype model. And so, yeah, that's what I did. I tried to model virtually. There's probably 2 industries on the branch that I'm not modeling, but I have a unique approach. I think you were going to get to it, Tom, where I only actually model 3 of the industries on the layout, and then I have staging where, let's see, 6 other industries are represented. So they're not actually represented on the layout physically, but the cars are moved on the layout and then delivered and retrieved from staging.
Well, while we're talking here, let me bring up your track plan, Scott, and you can talk a little bit more about those industries and how you serve them, and also how you switch them.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
So,
While we're waiting to get that up, I just want to make it a point, just to say that Kenny Long has stated in love this series. It has inspired me to stop waiting for everything to be perfect and to just start building. I started shelf and scale layout.
Perfect.
That's awesome.
And Dan Cohen has said I'll be able to handle up to 9 cars, and the setup I picked will have 6 industries. I'm starting with 2 2x4 modules.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, if everyone can see this, okay. If you look at the lower right, there's a staging track where the train makes its appearance on the layout in Rock Island, Illinois, and then you can see there that the first industry is a scrap dealer, Dell's Metals, and then as you move down the line, there's another spur that services a Sara Lee plant, and then after you round that first runaround, the stock track runaround, the final actual physical industry on my layout that's serviced is consumer aggregates, and that's where the Iowa Interstate gets most of their ballast. So there's a lot of traffic going to consumers because they're filling up ballast cars and taking them out to all areas on the Iowa Interstate. But then when after you pass over the Rock River there on those 2 truss bridges, then the only thing that I model physically on the layout is a runaround called the Milan runaround. And there's a switch, or a turnout, I should say, that goes to what's called the Eagle Sub, or the Eagle Side. And there are 2 industries. There's a lumber dealer, Robertson Dibdall, and then a food distributor, Eagle Foods, on that little track, that staging track. And that's just a flip up track. It takes about 4 or 5 cars. And then if you look all the way to the left under the Interstate 280, which acts as a nice break at the end of the layout, that staging track actually, on the plan here, it shows a single spur or a single track, but actually there's a runaround that I've built on that staging track. And that services 4 industries: Interstate Chemical, so I have chemical cars; Country Stone Landscape, so they take open hoppers; Miller Container is a box company, so they take box cars; and then the Steel Warehouse takes steel coil cars, which is one of my favorite types of cars. So that particular staging track services 4 different industries. So when a train pulls into the Milan runaround, oftentimes it has to, the cars aren't always blocked for the industries. Sometimes the engineer, the crew have to maneuver some cars around the runaround, especially when they're delivering to the Eagle side. And then if the train can be pushed into the staging under the I-80 overpass, but oftentimes they'll go engine forward. They'll pull it because there's a runaround at the Steel Warehouse, which is at the very end of the branch line. But because that staging track that isn't on that staging track, there is a runaround, so I can go engine forward, pull it in there, and drop the cars off. And so that's how that operates.
Okay. And when you push the cars in, like to the Eagle side, do you block them in order of which industry they're going to be set out at? And also, how do you pull the loads? Do you pull the loads first, or what's your normal procedure for that?
Yeah, well, the Eagle side's very interesting because the Eagle food distributor, there's no runaround down that sub, and the Eagle food distributor is a facing point spur. So the car would have to be in the front of the engine, while the lumber dealer is a trailing spur. So they would have to have the lumber cars behind the engine. So that makes another unique feature to the operation, which is fun because there's one car typically in front of the engine, and then 2 cars or more behind it. So that makes it interesting. Now, when it goes on the staging track, I'll use the 5-finger approach and shuffle cars around and move the engine so I can move it back onto the layout and that sort of thing. So that's
I have a question from Joe Lowe for you, Scott. And he wants to know, do the cars going into staging have to be blocked?
They don't have to be, but they typically are. Like I said, there's a runaround at the end of the staging that goes to the Steel Warehouse, and since that's modeled, that isn't modeled on the layout. There's some liberties there that I take, but typically they're blocked. Yeah, but like I said, sometimes the train crews will bring cars down to the Milan runaround, and then they'll have to do some work moving cars around on the runaround before they take them to the specific industries. So it just adds to the play value.
Well, that's a very interesting way to model industries without actually having to build the structures, and you can just block your cars and simulate that you would be spotting them at those industries. Do you put if you have guest operators, do you have a list there that shows which way the industry should be blocked or how the cars are supposed to be blocked?
Yes. So, that makes it easy for them.
Marty's train shed says, nice compact layout, Scott, with plenty of operations.
Well, thanks, Marty. I appreciate that. The whole goal was to build a small layout that had a lot of operational opportunities, much like Tom's is. I mean, my layout is very similar to Tom's. I mean, there's some differences, obviously, but in terms of being very compact and packing a lot of operation, that it's very similar to Tom's. Plus, I use a proto throttle, which I'm kind of biased toward. So
Yeah.
the proto throttle slows things down, and I also incorporate a writing conductor. So I use neodymium magnets. I don't know how much of a rabbit trail we want to go down here, but I glue small little micro magnets to my cars and also to the ground in different spots. So, and I have a little HO conductor that's a perfect fit. He's got a little metal shoe that's on the bottom of one of his feet. So he can, but it's L-shaped, so he can clip onto the side of the car, any of the cars, or he can stand on the ground wherever there's a magnet. So,
So cool.
I wanted to incorporate a real conductor, because a big part of the prototype operations is moving the conductor around on the train. So
True.
I wanted to replicate that. And between the proto throttle and the writing conductor, it really makes it a lot of fun, slows down operations, makes it more interesting, I think.
That's true. We're going to talk about that a little bit more on the show number 4, which will be coming up in a couple of weeks. Those are what we're going to call operational details. Yeah, that was a teaser. That was a 5-minute teaser, but that's okay. We're good.
I'm sorry.
We're good. We're real good. Well, one of the things we talked about in the last show, and let's see if I can do this here. We're going to share a screen. This is my capital building materials. And one of the things that you got to consider when you're looking at industries, in this case, is you've got your center beam car, and on the prototype, they have to be able to be unloaded from each side. So you need to have lots of room on each side of the siding. In this case, it's a little tight on the side towards the building because I added the lumber racks there, which reduced the space a little bit. My original plan was not to have the lumber racks there, and I would have had plenty of space. But that's something to consider, is loading and unloading cars. How are the crews supposed to get access to this car to unload it? If you spot a center beam car right up against the building, there's no way that they're going to be able to unload it. And one of the other interesting things are these cars have to be unloaded equally on each side. You can't unload one side and then go around to the other side. So you take a couple of pallets off of one side, you go around to the other side, take a couple of pallets off. If you unload the car only on one side, the car will tip over. And if you've seen these types of cars, there's warning stickers that will indicate that the cars can and will and have tipped over. So there's a reason why there's a warning sticker on there. But it's I don't think you want to be the one that's responsible for tipping that car over, especially when it crushes the boss's car or something like that. So again, it could be a real problem, but that's something to consider when you're designing your industries and trying to figure out where you're going to put stuff. We also want to talk about John. While you're talking here, I'll go ahead and pull up the photo of your transloading facility.
Okay.
So why did you decide to model a transloading facility?
All right. So when I recently did my extension over here, I wanted to add a little bit more industry to switch out. I wanted the main building in the back, so nice backdrop building, but I did have a track up front where I thought this is a great opportunity to switch out another industry, although I didn't want to block the view of the main structure. So I decided to fill that space with a transloading facility, which really is just a slab of concrete, which I just used some spackling material. I tinted it gray, cut out some expansion joints, put it right into the rails, and here I could model, in this case, flour being transported by rail and then switched over to truck in pressurized hoppers onto a pressurized trailer. So it's a great way to basically have an industry without anything, any buildings or anything. So you could just put a truck there, bring in some cars. I did a little gate. It's not operating like yours, but it's just a simple little gate. But again, it gives me another spot to switch out some cars. and I don't have any building blocking the rear building.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and that's access to the structure in the rear. If you're going to be coupling and uncoupling cars, if you put a large structure between you and the aisle, and then you have to reach over or around it, that makes it a lot harder to switch. So if you can, when you're designing your layout, try to keep the structures towards the aisle side lower so that it's easier to see over them, easier to reach over them, especially if you're uncoupling using bamboo skewers or even magnetic uncoupling. You want to be able to see the cars as you're trying to couple them and uncouple them. Also, John, give me a little bit of information about the truck there. Where did you find it, and how did you model it? Because that basically that is your industry right there, the tractor trailer.
Yeah, so although I didn't put any work into a structure, I put a lot of work into the trailer. I made that from a Shapeways kit. It is available on Shapeways. It's pretty expensive for the fine detailed trailer. You can get it in a lower grade print. It just takes a little bit more work of sanding and everything, but I spent a lot of time building that trailer, and it came out really well. I will definitely build some more, I think, on the next layout that I build. I plan to have a little bit more space for this type of operation. So I'll build a few more of these trailers, but I really wish they were commercially available, because I mean, they're pretty popular, and it definitely, without having a structure, it adds a perfect opportunity for an industry
That's a
that's
really
not really
great
there.
model. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's a great model, and basically what you would have spent on a structure is what you spent for the trailer. So it
Yeah.
kind of works itself out. I mean, the facility there was just simple paved lot, and then all you needed to add was the structure for it, and it gives you the ability to put all sorts of different car types in there if you wanted to for unloading. So a transloading facility is actually a really easy facility to model, and it gives you a lot of operations for different car types and stuff. One of the other things that we can talk about that a lot of people don't think about is car holding siding. Especially short lines, they make money by storing cars that aren't being used on the prototype, and they can get a fair amount of revenue that way. So what they do is they store them on a siding until the railroad needs them back, and they receive a check every day, if you will, or on whatever basis. But when the railroad needs them back, they may need the 4th or 5th car back. They may need the 10th car back. So now you've got another industry. Basically, you're going to have to go in, dig that car out of that siding, move it out, put the cars back, and then take it to the interchange track. Another industry that people don't think about modeling is called a storage in transit yard, a SIT yard. And basically what it is a company will load a hopper car typically, or another type of car with a commodity, but they don't have a place for it to go. They don't have a customer. So rather than keeping it at the facility, they'll send it to the railroad, and the railroad will store it in a yard. And then in the meantime, that business is trying to sell that commodity. So eventually they'll find a buyer for it. And now the railroad will need to go and find that car in the yard, dig it out, and put it on the next train going to whatever destination it is. Again, a pretty simple industry, couple of sidings, you store some cars there. They can all be the same type. They can be different car types. They're storing them in transit. Once they need that specific car, you'll go in, pull that car out. Again, easy industry. All you need is just a siding somewhere. You don't actually have to have a structure. Alex, while we got you back, glad to see you came back.
Sorry about that. I restarted the computer, and it looks like everything's working really great now. So
okay,
I apologize.
Good. No, not a problem. While we're doing this, what I want you to do is I'm going to pull up your picture here of your off layout industry, and have you talk a little bit more about that and how you were able to model a much larger industry without actually modeling anything. Let's see if I can bring this up.
While you put up the picture there, so what it is it's a spur that was built in 2006, I believe, for the co-op there in Frederick, Oklahoma, and it unloads liquid fertilizer from tank cars. and you can kind of see it over my shoulder here too, the couple tank cars sitting there. And there's a really, really massive tank. I don't know particular size, but it would have been really substantial to model on the layout. But in the prototype, the tank actually does sit back a pretty good ways from the track. And so I was looking at it, and I already knew kind of how I wanted to orient the prototype in my layout. And I thought, I don't really need to model this tank. All I have to do is model the gravel parking lot that this tank sits on, and model some hoses. So, you know, and it's a really simple hose apparatus they use to unload these tank cars. I don't know if it's anhydrous ammonia or what. I'm not super smart on what sort of things the farmers are ordering, but I know it's liquid fertilizer. And so I actually watched a YouTube video that John did about how he did the unloading hoses for his current corn syrup tank cars, and I just emulated that. I did it on my other layout, my East Penn layout for corn syrup, and I'm just going to do. I have the gravel parking lot built here, and I'm just going to lay a couple hoses across it, you know, showing that these tank cars are being unloaded for fertilizer.
And typically, how many tank cars can you spot on that siding?
It can handle about 2 tank cars. I haven't really designed it as a spot-specific industry because the prototype, there's only 1 tank sitting there. It's a really large tank, so but it's one more industry to switch.
Right, and the good part is you don't have to reach over it. The cars are just right there, but they're not right on the edge of the layout. You've got a couple of inches between the edge of the track and the edge of your layout, the fascia there. And what it gives you enough space. Yeah.
What you were saying earlier too, I've noticed. I have a friend. I haven't been able to get to the prototype location in a few years, but I have a friend who will go check it out for me from time to time. And shout out to John if he's watching. I appreciate all his help with my prototype research. But when they are not receiving fertilizer loads in the spur, the railroad will also push extra hopper cars for the grain elevators there as off-spot storage. So it's another place to, if it's a big harvest rush and they're not getting fertilizer, but we got a lot of cars coming into the grain elevator, you can also use that spur to store excess hopper cars for the elevators.
All right.
Well, I have a statement here, Tom. IMRO.com, Eric Hall says, he said, something I'd like to point out here. Most people look at large layouts and do not understand that they are a bunch of small layouts together. As an example, my Hermosa on my layout is a typical small layout.
Yeah.
Yes. I guess you could say some layouts are a bunch of small layouts strung together to become a large layout. So,
yeah.
And you could also have a small operating layout. A good friend of mine has a good sized room, but it's a very simple operation, and then it's a 1 train operation. You start off at the interchange, you take the cars up the line, drop them off at the industries, turn them on the Y, turn the locomotive on the Y, and then return back, picking up the cars that were left for the reverse trip, bring them back to the yard, sort them out, put your locomotive away. That operation takes about 2.5 to 3 hours running 1 train, and it's a blast. It's a blast. We run a 3-person crew. You've got an engineer, conductor, and a brakeman. We use hand signals, and again, it's a neat layout, but it's in a pretty good size. I'm going to say 20 by 25 foot room, maybe a little bit bigger. So again, that's a small themed layout, but it's in a larger space. So just because you have a larger space doesn't mean you have to fill it up with a complex, track plan. The final industry that we touched on a little bit is an interchange track, and that's again a universal industry where you can drop off any car, pick up any car. Alex, I think you have an interchange track on your layout. The other thing with an interchange track is it doesn't have to actually go to an industry on your layout. It could be interchange and they're moving it from the interchange track over to their larger yard, which you may not even model on your layout. So you're moving cars that may not actually have a location or a spot on your layout, which is a nice way to get cars that you really like, but you don't have an industry for them. That way there you could say, well, it's being interchanged, so we could move a certain type of car that maybe I don't have a facility that takes tank cars. So I'm going to interchange this, and it's just going to run through the layout and be dropped off at the other yard. Next, we want to talk a little bit about layout construction methods. Alex has got a unique method there. He's using IKEA shelves for his layout. Can you talk a little bit more about how you design that? And while you're doing that, I'm going to put up a overall picture of what you got on for your layout room.
Yeah. So I proved the concept with the IKEA shelves. I had seen some other modelers doing it, and then Bernard Kempinski, I think, had a really good article on it for his Portable Los Angeles layout in model urban planning. And so I built a kind of proof of concept layout in my living room, actually. I have a very understanding and awesome wife who let me put a train layout in the living room. But it's a little micro layout and a bookshelf. And so what I do is I just use these IKEA Ivar shelves. You can see a picture of it there. And it's a really simple modular shelving system. It's really affordable. And I did the math, and it was similar, if not the same price as buying wood and building similar benchwork just from the lumber yard. And when you're busy, you got career, family obligations, all the other stuff, I was like, well, this is actually, to me, it was worth maybe a couple dollars extra and not having to spend the time building the benchwork. I just got this modular benchwork that the layout rests on top of. And so I was able to kind of customize it to myself. I painted, it comes in just kind of an unstained, untreated pine. And then I painted the vertical portions white, and then I stained the shelves a dark stain. So it kind of adds to the decor of the house and the room. It looks nice. I can store all my locomotives that I don't need because I have a problem sometimes.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, I like John's display case better, but I've got all my MKT locomotives down there, and I've got all my railroad books and magazines and parts and all those things. And then the actual layout portion, I call them modules, not really modules, but the sections are just simple box girder boxes with really thick 3/4 inch plywood on the top. And they're not actually screwed to or nailed to the shelves. It's just a box that sits down on, it's perfectly measured out, so it just fits down on top of the shelf legs. And then the modules themselves are bolted together, and they, just by the nature of their own weight and how snug the fit is onto the legs, they just sit on top of those. And the reason I did this option, it would have been really cool to have it free floating and attached to the wall, but through my career, I'm in the military, we move a lot. And so I wanted something that could be taken apart, taken down, and moved when the need arose. And so these modules, it's built into a corner section and then 2 long sections. They do come apart. They're heavy. I will have to cut some wires and cut some tracks, but they will move. And then the shelving can all be, taken apart really quickly, boxed up, and then this layout can be set up somewhere else. The only thing I'll lose is the backdrop. The backdrop's screwed to the wall, but I can just, build a new backdrop when I get to my next location. So it's a little bit more, finagling to make sure that everything lines up right. But the flip side is I didn't spend a lot of time on bench work. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to attach it to the wall. And then once it's attached to the wall, how do I take it with me? It's really easy. It's really simple. And I don't enjoy bench work. I'm not a woodworker. My modules are kind of wonky and kind of, so the less time I could spend working on woodworking and the more time I could spend on working on trains, I was really happy about.
I just had a statement from You Run Naked Floor. He says, a wife that lets you build a layout in the living room? Question mark.
She's a wonderful lady.
I bet the garage is a closet for her shoes as well. Something had to give somewhere. And Marty down under says, that looks too tidy to be even my train room.
Yeah, that's how I kind of sold the idea of putting up a layout, even if it's just temporarily in an apartment, is if I could make it look somewhat neat, although it's a mess right now just because I've been pretty busy with other things, but if I could make it look presentable, it's not as nice as Alex's looks like furniture. Mine's kind of just a shelf.
He froze. I think he's frozen.
Yeah, we lost John. He was
I agree
having
with the
some
point
problems.
he's making, though. Like the more you
Yes.
can, because to me, I think that part of the awesome part is when your layout fits with your house, with your living space, you're not having to disappear to go work on it. You know, sometimes I sit there and drink a sweet tea and run trains. My wife's watching TV, or we talk and working on our projects. So it's great that it can be integrated into the living space when it's a small layout that's well presented. And John, I think yours looks great because it's got that shadow box look to it. It's really awesome.
Looks like I'm frozen, huh?
Yeah, I think you're back. You're back with us, John. We can see your layout behind us, behind you there, and basically you've got a shadow box look to it where you've got the shelf and then storage underneath it and stuff. One question for you, Alex: what is the height of your layout there with using that IKEA shelving unit?
They are 44 inches high, and so
Okay.
that's what I use, 44 inches.
Okay. And that may be a little bit low for some people. Mine's in this case is set at 54 inches, so it's a little higher, but that gives me space underneath it. John's layout is set about that height. Scott, how high is your layout set?
Mine's just like yours, Tom. Mine's 54.
Okay. And we want to talk a little bit with Scott here because he's got a very unique method of construction here for his layout. So let me bring up some of his photos. But if while I'm bringing that up, if you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
Sure. My wife and I moved into our current home 8 years ago, and this is the last move, Lord willing, that we want to make. We wanted to make one more move. We're in our late 50s, and we've put down roots in the community that we've lived in for many, many years. So we found the house that was, I guess you'd call our dream home. It fit us really well. So I knew that this would be my opportunity to build a permanent layout, if you will. So what I did was I wanted the shadow box effect on my layout as well. And so I had a friend who suggested, why don't you go down to the local metal fabrication shop and see what it would cost if you had custom metal shelves made, because they'd be super strong, lightweight, easy to install. And the design of my benchwork was going to be very simple. I was going to have basically just shelves, 3/4 inch plywood with 1/2 inch homosode on top. So that the bottom's the fascia with that configuration, and then the top was just 1/2 inch plywood with a valance for the shadow box effect. So I really didn't need anything fancy, and I went down to the fabricator, and they said, sure, we could do those for you. We could weld them together. It's just L bracket. We could weld them together. I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I needed about 15 or 16 of them, and they told me we'll do each one and powder coat it for $12 each. So I figured, heck, that's a deal. So that's what you see in this photo is those steel frames, and they were supposed to be perfectly 90 degrees, but they weren't perfect. After I screwed them into the studs, when I started to put the plywood on, I had to shim it a little bit, but it was an easy fix. But that was my approach, and it worked out really well. So it was as far as I was concerned, it was a simple, inexpensive way to make basically permanent bench work. And I should say I also needed 2-foot storage shelving underneath. So the brackets come out not a full 2 feet. I think they come out about 18 inches, and then the additional length is just the plywood that comes out. So that was my approach.
Okay. Well, I got one more picture here, Scott. Let me see if I can pull this up here for you. There you go. Let's see. There's a little bit better shot of your layout with the bench work. I guess the layout base in place.
Yeah, I've got I've got the fascia, all the layout tops in place, You can see on the right, there's the one depressed area, that's for the river scene. And then I've got the fascia up and the valance up and the lights installed and the blank backdrop installed, which is just 1/8" masonite, just painted white. And you can see the storage shelves are still there. And what I have currently, I mean, the layout's progressed quite a bit since this photo was taken, obviously, but I've got skirting, so it makes for a very attractive space, comfortable.
Yeah. Well, while you're talking about that, I'm going to bring up a picture of your more completed room with it a little bit more finished, and we'll see how that looks.
You can
here.
see some of it right here, right behind me.
Yeah, let's see here.
My layout space doubles as my office too, since I work from home.
There you go. Well, here now you can see a little better shot of Scott's, we'll say, finished, or more towards the finished side of his layout. And that's something else to talk about a little bit, is layout aesthetics. You want a place that's comfortable to go to and be in for several hours. If you're working in a space that's not heated or air conditioned or climate controlled or have adequate lighting, then it takes some of the fun out of it. And you can see here that Scott's done a really nice job of finishing everything off and giving it we'll call it a museum quality look.
Definitely.
Yeah, and some viewers might be interested. I somewhere I ran across a modeler who had installed stair railings around his layout so that people could have something to lean on without sticking their forearms on the scenery or the side.
What's his name? We had him on as a guest on our show.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I could give that fella credit, because that was a great idea. I just went down to my local Menards and got the brackets and a length of just pine railing and painted it the same color as the fascia, and screwed and glued the brackets onto the fascia, and it's plenty supportive, and it's really neat space for people to put their arms on and not have to knock over eventual scenery.
It's really impressive, and I love that. I followed your work, and I love that you've added the Iowa Interstate stools and the neon sign and everything, because it helps focus the viewer that this is really gives a sense of place beyond just the layout, but even the room adds to the aura of it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks. Yeah, sometimes I think I go a little overboard, but I just can't help myself.
Not at all. Not at all. I would do the same thing for farm rail.
I love the switch stance. It's just the coolest.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, we're gonna stay on this with Scott here. We're gonna move into the next section here, which is hand laying versus manufactured track.
Right. I'm sorry, Tom. That gentleman you want to give credit to is Lex Parker.
Lex Park. Okay. That's great.
Let's see here. Yeah. Well, hopefully popping up here. Here's some of Scott's handiwork here. He's going remember that little bit extra he says he goes? Well, this is his distressed ties. So he's partway going through this. What was your experience, if you will, talking a little bit about hand laying track versus buying, we'll say, manufactured track or pre-assembled track?
Yeah, I've got modeling friends who just lay the most beautiful track with commercial products. But for me, I've always been frustrated on anything I did before I started to build the Mylon branch. And when I always wanted to hand lay my own track. And so I said this was the time I was going to do it on my permanent layout. And so, but I did something really crazy, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I decided that I really wanted that branch line look. And since I was hand laying, hey, what about the idea of distressing every single tie? Well, that was an exercise in pure insanity, because I glued all the ties down, sanded them level, And then I took that razor saw that you see in the photo there and scraped it across the ties. And I should have stopped there. I mean, any sane person would have said, "Hey, good enough. Let's roll." But I took that little dental pick that you see there, and I scratched and picked and gouged the ties to split them and make them look like they were real ties, which took forever. And I would not recommend it, because after I was about a third of the way through the layout, I thought, this is just, I'm never going to make it. I'm going to give in. But I already started, and I have some perfectionistic tendencies. And so I said, I got to keep going. So I eventually made it all the way through. And then after I got everything distressed, then I stained it with some dark walnut stain. And it turned out nice, but it was really dark and real uniform. And well, I stained it with the dark walnut, then I ballasted, and the Iowa Interstate has a lighter white ballast that they use throughout the line. And my savior for the variation was pan pastels, because if anyone is handling track and wants to quickly weather their track to make it look hyper realistic, in my opinion, use pan pastels, because they go down very fast, and the color effect is awesome. So I mixed in a lot of gray with some darker ties, and brown, and for newer ties, and it just, in my opinion, it turned out great. So that's what I did.
Would you recommend it for a large layout, or was it what you did more than enough for you?
That really tested my patience. I don't think I would ever do it the same again. I think microengineering track painted and weathered, when I was halfway through distressing all those ties, I was just dreaming of microengineering track. So that gives you an idea of where I was mentally.
Well, once you started, you had to complete it.
I had to complete it, but I made it all the way through. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. If you're doing a small module, go for it, but not for the scale. My layout is 44 linear feet, point to point, not counting the runaround tracks and the sidings. So that's too much track to do this, but I've got it now, so I can. Hallelujah.
Bragging rights.
It looks great.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, it was well worth the effort, especially if you see one of these photos here. I'm gonna, while we're talking here, try to bring up one of the finished photos, but it looks amazing. I mean, I don't think you can get any better than the real prototype here. If you look here, look at the detail on the split ties and the different colors between them and everything else. I mean, the joint bars there. I mean, track is a model too. I mean, sometimes people forget about that, but it is a model. So spending the time on your track work is well worth it, especially on a small layout where you're going to be more up close and personal, as we've mentioned before, with your operations, with your cars and stuff. So you can spend that little bit of extra time and you'll get rewarded, because people will notice it, because they're operating slower and they can really look at it. Has anybody commented on your hand laid track, Scott, as when they've seen your layout?
Well, I haven't had that many people see the layout, so no, nobody's really commented on. I mean, I've had people comment from photos and things I posted, but just a couple other things in case anyone's interested in my approach to hand laying is I used microengineering code 70 track throughout. I didn't use any what do you call those? I'm spacing off here. To connect the two rails. Help me out.
Rail joiners.
Oh, yeah, rail joiners. See, I'm getting old. I didn't use any rail joiners. I just used 2 or 4 spikes on either side of where the rail. You can see it in this photo where there's a gap there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also used Proto 87. And for those of you who are familiar with the Proto 87 website, it's a website that is run by a guy named Andy Reichert, and he sells all kinds of very neat products for prototype fidelity. And I used his scale spikes, and they worked wonderfully, because not only are they to scale, but they're super easy to use, and they grip the tie and the homoso really, really well. So that's something. And then I also bought one of Fast Track's, Tim Morris's jigs for doing the frogs and the points. And that made it really, really quick and easy to do both of those, the frogs and the points. You know, filing them down, that sort of thing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who's the Ohio one wants to know, are those Proto 87 switch stands?
No, those are Central Valley switch stands. You can buy those from Central Valley, and they're really neat little switch stands because they matched my prototype really well, and they're plastic. And I just put a bunch of them together one evening and primed them, painted them, and yeah, they worked out really well.
Amazing.
I also did. I'll tell you one other insane thing I did was I used my Dremel tool to burnish the underside of each rail length and put my feeders under the rail on the base.
Also, you can't see the wires.
You can't see any wires on my layout, but
Wow.
that's another one. Don't do that. You know.
I don't think I'll do that one.
That took a long time too, but you know, you learn from doing stupid things. But
so I thought when I did this layout, I was really clever because I was watching or reading some of Lance Menheim stuff on weathering track, and so this time I went all out and I weathered the tie. I use microengineering Code 83, and I weathered the ties with burnt umber, artist oils, thinned with some mineral spirits. And after I primed them gray, and then I went back over and I did the rails in, you know, a different color, and I did joint bars, and I was like, never again. This is as much. Next time I'm just spraying it with brown spray paint. I thought I had done really, and they're like, oh no, you could have gone crazier. You could have gone a little bit further. That's really impressive, Scott.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
If you watch any of the videos of Mike Confalone's Allagash Railroad, Mike has a really good approach. He just goes for it. He's kind of an artist at heart, so he just mixes up 2 or 3 different paint colors for his microengineering track, and he just, I guess I could say, slops it on, but after he puts it on, he doesn't worry too much about, you know, doing everything finely. He just gets it down, gets the ballast on, and by the time he's done and it's all weathered, it looks fantastic and you don't have to sweat it. So that's a really good approach.
Yeah. Well, next let's move over here to Alex's layout, and want him to discuss a little bit about his track plan since he wasn't with us last week, and just give us a little bit of an idea of how you laid it out. I've got his hand-drawn track plan up here, and again, it brings up a couple of points. You don't have to have a fancy computer program to figure out your track plan, but if you notice, most of it's drawn to scale. He's got a pretty good idea of how the track lays out, and then he used this to set up his layout, and the finished product looks pretty close to what he's got hand drawn out here. So if you want to go ahead and just talk about your layout plan a little bit, and then as you go through that, I'll try to pop up a couple of pictures of your layout that you got.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, this is Frederick, Oklahoma, circa 1995 to 2005. I've always hand drawn my track plans. I use KISS method track planning tools. The room is it's not a perfect room, but it's about 11 by 11. The layout is 11 by 10.5 feet, and it's built into those 3 sections. I wanted to try to recreate Frederick, Oklahoma as faithfully as possible. I had built kind of proto freelance layouts before, and it kind of frustrated me because like I said, I'm out here. I don't live in Oklahoma right now, not by choice, but for my career, and I missed home, and I wanted a little slice of home. And so Frederick, it was an end of the line, so trains don't pass through; they terminate in Frederick. If you look at the upper left-hand corner there, that picture by the gas station, that's the north end of town where the train comes into town. It works the industries, runs around the train, and then goes back out. I don't have staging. I wish I did, some kind of cassette or something. So the train just starts there at that grade crossing. And so sometimes if I have a really long train, it's, you know, almost to the second grade crossing there by Cassidy Grain up there at the top. But the train just starts in the layout like it's coming to town. You work the industries and you run back to that side of the layout. And that's true to the prototype. It's an end of the line. And I think Ian Rice, his work, he's a, you know, really prolific British modeler who's written a couple books for Kalmbach. Small Smart Practical Track Plans was a huge influence on me when I was a teenager and getting into model railroading. And his focus on that British mindset of, you know, end of the line layout, so you don't have to have staging on both sides, is really influential. So it is highly compressed, and Frederick, Oklahoma is not actually on a curve. It's straight and flat as a pancake because it's West Oklahoma. I had to bend it around a curve in my room. But every industry that is in Frederick is represented on the layout. The track plan, like I said, is hand drawn with number 5 turnouts for the most part, a couple number 6s. And I was pretty happy. It did work out and fit exactly as drawn. And that's one thing I really encourage you. If you are hand drawing track plans, you've got to be disciplined, because it's too easy to start, oh, well, I could fit this in there. And you've got to, you know, do it. And I always would make myself know, if anything, I would estimate that I'm underestimating, and I'd keep giving myself more space. And it turned out really well. One thing that was helpful was in the Code 83 line, microengineering has those curve diverging radius. And so especially in the lower right-hand corner there, where you see where my interchange is with the dummy track for the WT&J railroad and the spurs going off to the cotton warehouses, those are really sharp. And even in the prototype, now they're not number 5, but they're pretty sharp curves off the main line. And so those curve diverging, it's part of the yard ladder system from microengineering, really helped. But I wanted to get the flavor of Frederick with the operational interest. Obviously, I can't take 18 car or 20 car cuts of grain hoppers, but and I wanted to, you know, kind of some small town scenes like the gas station, like a water tower by the cotton plants. So I have the gas station. It kind of is the intro as the train's coming on. Then you have Cassidy Grain, which is one of the grain elevators. There's one thing that's different. It shows there's a right-handed turnout. I actually have a left-handed turnout there. That can take 3 cars. The fertilizer, the liquid fertilizer spot can take 2 cars. And then you got another grain elevator that has 2 tracks with spouts going to each track. They can take a total of 6 cars. Another fertilizer spot by that. And then you have the interchange where you have the crossing at grade, which you have to stop at, which gets annoying, you know, not annoying, but it's really fun operationally, because when you're switching it and you're pulling a cut of cars across that crossing, you have to come to a stop and blow the horn. And then you go down to the south end of town where you have those cotton warehouses past the interchange. And that picture Tom just threw up there, I had to have a wheat field. I mean, if you have Oklahoma, you've got to have amber waves of grain. So have my wheat field scene and just kind of try to get the feel of those small farming towns. Even when you think of farm rail, it gives you that sense of place. And so it's really fun. I mean, I never work every industry. When I do an operating session, it's a really laid back operating sessions. I just see what cars I've set out and what industries in my head I'm going to work. But it's usually about a 45-minute operating session by myself. I do have right now. I operate it with a Digitrax Zephyr, and the plan is there. You got my the fertilizer plant, and then you can see there that corner, which that corner is right behind my head there. That eventually is going to be the largest grain elevator on the layout, the co-op grain elevator. Still working on those, but I do eventually plan to incorporate a proto throttle to help slow down the operations, make it a little bit more fun. And it's really fun to operate.
Well, one of the things I notice is you've got a lot of open space, and we talked about that on one of the previous shows, is the negative space. And I think you've done a great job of leaving a lot of open space there so that it gives you the look of where you're modeling, because there's a lot of open space in the Oklahoma area and middle of the country. Yeah. And you've done a great job of capturing that, even though people may say it's boring, but it's beautiful because you've got the fields and the crops and the grain elevators and all that other stuff that offset the we'll call it the flatness of that area.
And
Oh, yeah.
and that's one thing I really wanted to go for is these small towns. Behind my grain elevators, which isn't modeled, is downtown 2 blocks away, and it is really thick. There's tons of buildings, but this railroad misses downtown by about 2 blocks, and out by these grain elevators, it's not. I wouldn't call it industrial, but it's not residential, and it's not. It's not residential, and it's not industrial. It's just open space where there's elevators, there's farm equipment, and so even if there's not fields, it's just kind of grass and shrubs and maybe a tree here and there. There's really not that many trees. It is really just negative space out in these places, and I didn't want to try to fill that up.
Chris Bell wants to know, he's asking about initials. What is the WT and J?
That is the Wichita, Tillman, and Jackson Railroad. It runs from Wichita Falls to Altus, Oklahoma. And it's the former, so the farm rail line that I'm modeling was originally the Frisco, and then the WT&J was originally the MKT, the Katy. They're both robust short lines. They're both still active, and so they do cross at this point. They don't interchange a lot of traffic in Frederick, but they do interchange some things. And I kind of, like you were talking about the universal industry, I have some really pretty Spring Mills Depot pressurized differential covered hoppers that I don't have an industry for, but in my head, the WT&J can hand them off to my layout, and my train picks them up and takes them to points north.
Right.
So I can use some rolling stock. But yeah, WT&J, the Wichita, Tillman, and Jackson, great little short line.
And Why Run Naked 4 wants to know, is the fertilizer building a kit?
Yes, that's a Blair line kit.
Marty's train shed looks like an Aussie scene, typically rural open country.
Aussie modelers are inspiring, so I love seeing some of the stuff, and yeah, there's definitely similarities.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that your layout, I really like those scenes, Alex. One thing that your layout makes me think about is on a small layout, just because it's small, don't try and pack it full of everything. Don't try and make your scenes so overwhelming with too much. If you keep it sparse, then any details you do add, they're going to be amplified, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Sparse but realistic. I mean,
Definitely.
Yeah, and we mentioned that in the previous show is you've got some star industries and star structures, so you want to leave some space around them so they really stand out. And the one that I see right there is in the corner, the farmers co-op, and maybe even the gas station. You've got a nice gas station over there that if they go onto your website, they can see that as it's being completed, or it's going to be completed soon.
Yes,
But
I need to post
again, you've got space around that. You've got some space around it, so it stands out, because again, it's got negative space around it, so you can really focus on the details, and then your eye goes down and goes into the next scene. And the streets stand out. You've got realistically modeled roads, and the interchange track is again a great industry, because it's there on the prototype, but it allows you to interchange all kinds of cars and gives you lots of operations with just a very short piece of track.
Yeah. If anybody wants to follow Alex has a YouTube channel called Red Dirt and Rails. And you also have a Facebook page, correct?
I do. My Facebook is Farm Rail and HO Scale, and then my website is Okie Rails, OKIE, okierails.com.
Yeah, Chris Bell says thank you for that. That name is familiar, and he says I do enjoy following your farm rail on Facebook.
Appreciate it. Thanks for following.
Yeah. Well, I see we've easily blown past an hour or so, so I think we've pretty well covered everything in show 2.1, because we couldn't get it all into show 2, so we had to add the 0.1. The next show should be next Saturday, October 10th at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and it's going to be on operations. And when you say that word operations, some people cringe and some people smile. But we're not gonna tell you how to operate, but we're gonna give you some different options, and it may not be what you're thinking. It doesn't have to be all structured. It can be just as simple as just picking up a throttle and deciding what cars you want to switch. You don't necessarily even need a switch list or car cards or anything like that. If you've got a small layout, that's the perfect time to just go down after dinner, switch some cars around. So we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about maybe a little bit more formal operations. I'll go over the switch lists that I have on my layout, but they can also be simple, just handwritten switch lists. We could talk to Scott and John also and see how they do the operations on their layout. And we're not gonna tell you how you have to do it, but we'll give you some options. And again, with a small layout, there's a lot of options. And some of the best parts are it doesn't have to be so formal. You can have a more relaxed operating session and don't feel the stress of, we'll say, timetable and train orders, or you got to wait for the signal, or you're in the hole for so many hours. I've operated on layouts like that. Sometimes the fun's taken out of it when you have to sit at a signal for a real hour because the dispatcher's holding you and stuff. So there's some benefits to operating on a small layout. So we're going to talk about that on the next show. You got anything else you want to add there, Bill?
Well, no, I just want to thank you all for coming and doing this, especially Tom and John for putting this together and letting us host it on the Model Railroading Live. Scott and Alex, thank you so much for being a part of this. Tom and John, again, thank you. It has been really, this has been really a great informational and actually inspiring together, with this. And I'm glad that Model Railroading Live was able to host it, get this out there, because it coincides with what we were saying on a previous series that we did. This is a little bit more in depth. Just to guys give you a headache. I'm giving just to give you guys, and you think this is easy, right? Just to give you a heads up, on October 7th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, my show, Who's Big Bill Talking To? We talking to Cross Anchors Railroad. These two gentlemen, Brian and Michael, have this extraordinary O-scale layout in their attic, and it's worth looking at. And wait till you see the electronics. I'm hopping on it because it's really good. And then the following night, on Thursday, October 8th, is Johnny's Train Talk Show. He'll be back on air, and that's where you guys can come in the community, like right here, and be a part of the show and bring and brag if you have something you want to bring. If you have any questions, anything going on in your model railroad and you want it answered, we got like a ton of experts. If you ask 6 model railroaders a problem, they'll give you different opinions. So it's worthwhile. That's on the 8th of October at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once again, I want to thank everybody for being part of this. Oh, hold on. Yeah, hello? Yeah, Rod, I know you were waiting. I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, next time. Seriously, Rod, there's no use you don't have to. Okay, thank you. Anyway, we want to apologize to Rod Stewart. Come on, and things were getting out of hand. Not out of hand, but we were having a lot of fun and stuff like that. So, I do apologize to Rod Stewart that we weren't able to get you in on the segment here. I know you had to, you had a lot to add, but we're sorry. And John, what did you say? Who? Oh, Marky Wood Die. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Marky. Thanks, guys. It was my first time. Hey, appreciate you coming out here. Thank you for being a participant. Check these guys out. They each have their own YouTube channel. And you can see Scott Thornton is in the recent issue of Model Railroading Craftsman. He wrote an article for them on operations, correct, Scott?
Yeah, maintenance of way operations.
MOW, maintenance of way. Go check that out. Go to your local. If you don't get it delivered, have it delivered. If you don't have it, go buy it and read Scott Thornton's article. It's very worthwhile to read. Again, gentlemen, thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for taking your time out and doing it. I want to thank all you guys out there for participating and being a part of this as well, because without you guys out in the community, we're just talking to dead air. So you guys be well, be safe, and be blessed, and we'll see you on the radio. Seriously, Rod, I'm sorry. Really. I'll call you. I'll call you. Night.